so that's essentially what I did to make. Now again, see this one just says work path. So if I don't say this right now, if I don't give it a name, it's just going to make another path on top of this. And so once I say the file, that work path, this is now, all these paths will automatically be saved when I save the file. I don't have to do anything special.
Once you're finished drawing, you press Enter key or?
It knows that the path is there because when I got to the end, I made sure I touched the end point.
Okay.
So I closed the path. If you notice, you can look at the tape, but if you notice when I got to the point where I was at the end, the icon changed to suggest that I was closing the path.
Okay, right after that, what is the next step?
Right. Right after it closes,
yep.
Then I just go back and edit points.
Edit points?
Edit the points. I just go back in and do what I just showed you. Look.
After that. After editing.
Oh, after I'm all done editing,
yep.
I just go to the menu here, double click, and give it a name.
Okay.
And now it's saved with a name.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to take that path off just because it's the one. Okay, so here's the face. I got an ear up here too. I just sketched her ear one day. So here's the face, the shape that I just made. So this is the path that I filled. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Let me do it again. So I want to make sure I have a layer to work on. I go to the path menu. I activate the path that I want to use, and then at the bottom of the icon menu here, there's a little fill icon, this little solid circle. Can you see that? I can't turn around at the same time. So when I click that, what it does is it takes whatever the current color is and fills that. All right, so now we got it. Okay, so what I want to do next is add a shadow that represents the shadow on her throat. Okay, I want to add this shadow. So I want to kind of protect the line of the mandible and then get this area. So I'm going to create another layer above my current layer. This is going to be the shadow layer. I'm going to go back to my path and I'm going to do a couple things different now. So the first thing I do is I'm going to activate. This is a cast. This is a path that represents the contour of her throat, where the shadow's falling, right there. Okay. Most of this path has absolutely no value whatsoever. I just really need this. So I'm going to activate that. So this icon, just so you're kind of familiar, this one is fill, this one is stroke, and this one is turn the path into a selection. All right, so now that thing is selected. That path is no longer active. It is now a selection. Okay, I'm going to go under select and say modify feather. And I'm going to turn that up to, like, let's say 120. So that just made the path very soft. Okay, basically give me a real soft range. I'm gonna hit D, Command D to stop that and show you another way I can do that. I can go throat shadow, come over here to the little menu on the path, say make selection, and then do the same thing here. Okay, and I'm going to make it a new selection. All right, so now I've got this very soft path, which is, what I want. If I can show you real quickly, if I take, let's say, a shadow value, and I use the gradient tool here, and I drag in this direction, you can see how soft that is. Okay. So what I do, if it bothers me to see this little what they call marching ants, that thing blinking. So I use Command H to hide it. Okay, it's the same thing as saying It's been so long since I actually used the menu to do this. I'm trying to remember where it is. Somewhere up here it says hide selection.
Can you unhide the selection? Is it Command H again?
Yeah, Command H is just to hide it and unhide it. Okay, so that gets it out of the way. For right now, I'm going to leave it on just so I can see. Okay, now the next thing I have is this path which I call the mandible. Now this path is following the jaw line or the mandible line. Okay, and it's protecting to a certain extent the ear. All right, and I notice right here I'm missing this earlobe just a little bit. So let me just quickly adjust that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, this path is now active, right? That's the active path. Go back to the same menu I did before. I'm going to say make selection, but I'm going to do some different things here. What I'm going to do is, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do this first. I'm going to go get the whole head and face. I'm going to say make selection. And I'm going to say intersect with the current path. And I'm going to tell it to make that selection 0. Okay, see what it did? So what it did was it said, okay, this path went all the way around, right? This path overlapped, okay? When I said make this a selection, intersect with the other one, but do it with 0, this edge now is tight. See, if I go ahead and gradient, fill this with a gradient again, let me see if I can get this to show up because it's so big. It's hard to get because it's so big and soft. Maybe let me make this a little darker. Okay, see how it's crisp here at the edge, but it's soft up there? Okay, so what happened was the intersection, wherever it intersected, because I said intersect 0, it gave it a crisp edge. Wherever it didn't intersect, in other words, this is all the original path here, okay, it stayed.
How did it intersect? I didn't understand.
Okay, we'll do it again. All right, so here's the throat shadow.
Okay.
I'm going to say make selection. And I'm going to give, let's not give it quite such an aggressive one. Let's just say 80. And I'm going to make it a new selection. Okay? So now if I fill this with a gradient, you can see soft everywhere. Okay? If I were to fill it just by saying edit fill and use the foreground color, see, it's soft on all of its edges, right? Okay. Now, I'm going to take this path. This is the one that, all right.
Okay.
Now look where the two things intersect. See, follow what I'm saying? So now with that path active, I'm going to say make selection, and I'm going to say don't feather, make a sharp edge. And instead of giving me a new selection, I want you to intersect. So that means this big circle and this smaller shape intersect, and right here is going to be clipped, right? Because that's not an intersection. This one goes outside of that boundary, right? So intersection is only where they overlap. Okay, so now I have a sharp, right? Okay, so now I want one more thing, right? I want to protect the ear and the jawline. Okay, so this time I'm going to get this mandible path, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to become a selection as well. But this time I'm going to say, give me a feather of 20 and subtract. So now what it's going to do is wherever this is, wherever the mandible path is, it's going to subtract that away from wherever it overlaps. Okay, so when I say okay, I now have that. Okay, so now we've got, if I take the gradient tool and drag across, see what I get? So this is a 20, so it's soft. This is a 80, so it's softer.
Is that a 20?
The mandible I had at 20, yes.
Okay.
And the larger, or the shadow throat thing I had at 80. So this is very soft. This is just a little soft. Otherwise, it looks very artificial. Okay. So each time I said make selection, okay, I chose a different feather value. 0 for when I wanted it to clip real tight, 20 for when I wanted just a slightly softer edge, and 80 for when I wanted a real soft edge. Now, normally what I would do, and this is something really important to understand, I usually don't do this here. I don't do this when this is a blank like this. What I would have done is painted on this and taken that flat gray and painted layers on it. And then I would have used this at the end to add this cast shadow on top. In other words, I don't want to have to go in here now and paint, because it's going to be very difficult to match the subtlety of this with a hand-painted look. So normally what I've done is I'd built up a little bit of information on the throat and then done this on top of it. So this is the cast shadow. So this is my mind thinking backwards. All right, it's warped. It's inaccurate. I think of like Peter Pan. I think like the shadow is somehow painted on there. In reality, it's light being blocked, right? It's actually light being taken away. But in my mind, I think of it as I have to add the shadow. So and I would do exactly what we did here. I would make the shadow on a separate layer. And what I can then do is say multiply, and then I can decide how aggressive I want that shadow to be. Okay. So those are the steps. Oh, and I would do one more step. Okay, here's another path. This one very much like the head. The only difference is it ends up clipping here. Okay. Now, also just to make it clear to y'all, when I made to make the neck one that I just showed you, I didn't redraw it, right? I take this, I say duplicate path, I give it a new name, and then I use the same pen tool, right? And I just take away the points. Sorry. See what I'm getting at? So I did the same thing when I did this path. I just started with a duplicate and then subtracted points and modified a little bit. So, and the advantage of that is I know I'm going to have exact registration that way by duplicating it. So I know there's not going to be any misalignment. Follow my point? Plus it saves you some time. So let's go back. So we go to the neck. Now I'm going to make this a selection. I'm going to make it a new selection, and I am going to leave it at 20. Okay, so it's going to have it's kind of a soft edge. Then I'm going to go get my head and face, which is the entire thing. I'm going to again make it a selection. But this time I'm going to intersect, but I'm going to make this 0. So that's wrong, I'm sorry. I don't want to intersect. Hey, Jim. I'm sorry, I don't want to intersect. I think what I want to do, what did I do there? I want to Oh, poo. I know what I want to do. I'm going to drop the first selection. I'm going to make this head and face, the entire thing, at 0 as a new selection. And then I'm going to take the neck one and subtract it. But I'm going to say subtract with a feather of 20. So now I'm left with just that little spot there. Follow I'm getting at? This edge of it is 20 pixels. So the feathers is basically, it's now got a softness. This edge, because it's the original one that was selected with 0 feather, is sharp. So I get the same thing. So I can either do the gradient or just paint along that edge, and it will, give me a soft edge there. Follow I'm getting at? So that's a way, it's the same kind of thing we did here at the jawline. So now the other thing you guys can, that I like to do, so I end up having, quite a few paths. And, you can see where, even though I've done this for years, sometimes I remember which one do I have to subtract. So let's say I want to do the neck shadow thing, right? Let's see if I can remember the steps we did. We started with the neck shadow. Well, I'm sorry, not the neck, the throat shadow. I made it a selection with a very soft feather, right? And then got my my mandible shadow. I said, make a selection, subtract, but this time only do 20, is that right? And then at the end I said, give me the head and face, I'm sorry. Make it a selection, don't give me any, and intersect, okay? So I made that same shape, right? Now here's the deal. Let's just suppose I decided I needed to redo the shadow. For some reason I messed it up, I got to redo. I got to go through this 3 steps all over and over again, let's say. That's a pain in the neck. There's another thing I can do. This combination now is a selection. I can go under the select menu and say save selection. Call it it's a new channel, and I can call it if I can remember how to spell, throat shadow. Okay. Now it didn't look like it did anything. I could say what it did. So I dropped the selection. I go to the channel layer, and you notice there it is. So if at any point in the future I want to, instead of having to go through those 3 steps, I can immediately just do that, and it comes up. Okay, now, if I click here, this shows me the mask of it. So it looks odd, right? It looks like it's not quite the same thing. It really is. It's just because it has such an aggressive thing. So this is where it is. Okay. The red is the mask. Sometimes it helps people to. It goes back to an older printing technology where you'd use what was called rubylith, a red film, to knock out areas and say, here's a hole where some color will be applied. Wherever it's red, nothing will be applied. Okay? So you don't necessarily have to put that on to do it. Okay? So the point of that is you can build up a collection of channels. So again, if you need it later on, you can use it. If there's something repetitive, if you have 3 or 4 things that will be the exact same place, you need that exact same shape, and again, it's, kind of a manipulation of 3 or 4 paths, instead of having to repeat that over and over again, you can save the path. The other thing you can do with this, which is fun, is we're looking at doing the gray. You can also do things like apply a filter with that selection on there. So if you did something like added noise, and let's see, let's say I went in and add amount of noise. And let's say I said Gaussian, so it's not uniform. Can you see the little dots building up down there? This might go a little. See what I'm getting at? Now, what's happened though is, the thing you want to notice is the dots are more prominent here and fade off here. So the effect of the filter is just like with the gradient. Where the feather is, that effect is softened. So you were talking about the other day, you know, I could make a brush with stipple on it to add texture, like skin texture. You could do the same thing with this. You could add noise and restrict that noise to just the midtone, where texture is typically prominent, and then use this kind of technique so that it faded away as it went into the shadow. You don't see texture in the shadow.
In the in like if it's colored though, doesn't adding noise add
You can tell it to add the noise monochromatically,
Oh, okay.
and then you can apply it as using the you could apply it using color as opposed to multiply,
Okay.
or you could just leave it multiply. Yeah, you could. It will go into like multicolor, but there's a option when you're in color that lets you say monochromatic instead of. And that would be something definitely, you know, I'd put on a layer and then I could play with it again. Now, the one other thing I noticed, like for you two guys in particular, when you were working on your thing, I noticed that it was kind of, there were a lot of like marks, you know, like very textural, you know what I'm saying? So the only thing I just recommend to you is, you were asking a little bit about that. This is kind of like what's the word? In progress. This is not, you know, finished. But one way I get like more smooth things out here is using that same thing we were just talking about. So I might go and take my path for the head and face, or actually I have a skull path, and I'll just load it up, and then I'll hide it. And then if I want to get something here, you know, where I want, let's say I want, for example, some kind of reflected light along this edge, what I can do is get my brush, make it really big. Okay, make sure it's got very little smooth, you know, very minimal hardness, 0. So let's say I take a value here, and I'll actually work out here. And the overspray from the brush will just start, see what I'm saying? To come in and add that little bit of light, but this masking will keep it crisp. So that's the same way, like to get this highlight along the infraorbital ridge here, I want to make it crisp, right? So I'll take the orbit and I'll make a path for it. Okay? And right now that path would only let me paint inside there. So I can say select inverse. This time take a smaller brush. And like I said, most times I like to have a little bit of an angle. And then maybe pick up a highlight and go along that edge. Follow what I'm saying? So that, and then when I hide that edge, it stays crisp. Now, how could I make that a little less crisp? I could have made the feather on it, right? I could have feathered it maybe 10. And you're going to find, like you were doing 700 pixels per inch, when you're at this high resolution like this, you're going to have to make a very aggressive feather if you want to keep it soft, like a large number. If you're working at 72, let's say you're doing it, you know this piece is only going to go for the internet, it's never going to be printed, and I almost never assume that. I almost always work high and then reduce it because I can throw stuff away, but I can't build stuff back up. So, you know, for example, if I wanted to put a bit of a highlight on here, I would build a path for the zygomatic, and then literally let me paint along that edge so I got a bit of a tightness there. Okay? So I think this is something you can listen to when you need to go to sleep.